What's going on, YouTube? Tom here. Today I actually wanted to cover another topic that might be a little bit on the controversial side. And that is, why exactly is it the manual transmission is a dying breed? Now, first of all, it's up for debate whether it is or not. Some people try to say how much better manuals are, and then there are those people, but then some people, of course, agree that manuals are dying. So let's talk about why. First of all, let's put there this way. In the last couple years, the statistics have come out and said that only around a quarter of cars, actually not even a quarter, I believe it was closer to like 10%, it changes year to year, are actually being sold with a manual transmission. They say about a quarter of people these days even know how to drive a manual transmission anymore. I think I'm getting confused with Corvette. I believe a quarter of Corvette sales are manual anymore. The other 75%, of course, are automatics. So anyway, let's discuss some of the reasons why is the manual a dying breed. And simply put, if you look at cars these days, so many fewer are even sold with a manual transmission to begin with. And there's some reasons for that. First of all, when you talk about the manual transmission, in the olden days, you used to buy a manual because it was a faster car in almost all cases. It got better gas mileage in 99% of cases, and also it was a cheaper car to buy. Now, there's why that's no longer true. When we talk about sports cars, going back to the Corvette example, these days, if you look at the new Corvette Z06, the C7, it's the first Z06 to be sold with an automatic option. In the past, they were manual only. And of course, this means that the simple reasons. Well, one, the automatic is faster. It's a known fact that the automatic legitimately is faster in a straight line. It's faster around most road courses. And also, they're doing it for sales. Simply put, no one knows how to drive a manual these days. So when you look at the number of people that even know how to drive a manual, they say 25%, and all that's the older generation. People like, for example, I'll take my dad as an example. He made one comment one day about he's been an off and on manual driver for the last 50 years he's been driving. But the reality is he just recently even got a manual car again. The fact is, my mom doesn't even know how to drive a manual. She has in the past, but she claims these days that all she needs is some practice, but she actually hasn't driven manual in so long, she's essentially forgotten. Trying to get out of the parking lot here without getting killed. So anyway, then you look at the younger generation, the millennials. Simply put, millennials don't know how to drive manual at all. A lot of people my age, I'm 22, just simply have never learned how. You look at driver's ed. When I took driver's ed in high school, that was 2011, actually 2011, actually that was 2010. Ford Fusions was the cars they had. My high school, I think, still has Ford Fusions. Back in 2010, that was your choice, automatic. Of course, you go back to my dad's era, that's all they had was manual, so trade-offs. My dad being an entirely different generation. And of course, now he'll say it only took him a couple of times to learn how to drive a manual, versus these days it took me a good couple of weeks before I could consistently do it without stalling. That's because I learned how to drive first, then learned how to drive stick. And of course, these days, because there's so few cars that are even manuals, that people simply never learn how. And you say, I want to learn how to drive stick. Well, first thing, you either gotta have a car that's a manual, or you gotta know somebody. And anyone with a manual, anyone owns a car that's a manual, you're not gonna let anyone drive it. Simple experience. Go ask my dad to drive his truck. He doesn't let anyone drive it. Barely trusts the dealership when he takes it in for service to drive it. But either way, so that's one of the main reasons. And like I said, cars just simply aren't being sold with them. You look at of course, the Corvette was an option, but then you look at the opposite end of the spectrum. Let's take, for example, the Corolla. That's one of the best-selling cars. It has one trim level that's a manual, and it's the highest trim level. You have to pay extra to get the manual. And the average person's not going to do that. You take, for example, the Camry, the best-selling car in America, no manual option anymore. And then you look at other cars like the trucks, for example, any of the big three trucks, Neither of none of the three have a manual option anymore, and that's of course that's millions of cars right there, like 3 million-ish cars per year that they sell right there alone. 3-4 million, and it's like no, manuals just are not an option anymore. So of course, then you look at the other reasons down to the practical cars such as the Corolla. Now, back in the day, it used to be your options were, depending on the generation of Corolla, a 3-speed or a 4-speed automatic. I'm going off of the old ones for the 3-speed. My parents used to have a 1991 Corolla. More specifically, it was really my mom's car. Grew up in the back seat of that car. I remember it fondly. That's the example I'm going to use for this, since I'm actually somewhat familiar with them. It had a 3-speed automatic, because my mom, once again, really wasn't the greatest manual driver, and it was her commuter car. That car got roughly, 20-ish miles to the gallon with the automatic, and back then, if you had a manual Corolla, which was very common, you could still get, into the 40s miles per gallon. Back then, cars really did get better gas mileage than they do now. It's just they didn't have any of the emissions stuff, and they were also a lot lighter. But that was the argument there, and so a manual was better. And of course, these days, you look at the new Corolla, the 6-speed one gets into you get into the low 30s with it, because it's so much heavier these days. And then you get that new CVT Corolla, and I had the displeasure of test driving one. I say displeasure because my truck was in the shop, and it was a loaner car they gave me. So, CVTs, they feel awful, but then again, you got just driving around town, and this is a rental car, so I knew it had been thrashed around, and it was still telling me average since the car was made was 35. Very bumpy road right here, going over a bridge. So it's like all that gas mileage for a CVT. It's amazing how much better gas mileage these cars get these days. And manual is it's irrelevant, because you'll never get that in a manual anymore. And of course, the other reason manuals used to be real common was back in that same era in 1991. Automatics just didn't shift for crap. They were slow to shift. So at that point, you wanted to get a manual because they were consistently faster in all the sports cars of the era. You wanted to get a manual because you would simply have to shift it. Automatics couldn't shift. These days, they've gotten automatics to the point where they shift very fast. You look at, for example, the Chevy Camaro ZL1, that 10-speed, which is the fastest traditional automatic ever. And that's pretty simple. It shifts that fast. To the point where it borderline, depending on the situation, it is debatably faster than the manual one now because of how fast it shifts. And certain road courses even has been faster. So, and of course, because of that, you gotta ask yourself, if you really want to go fast, should you buy the manual or should you go ahead and get the automatic? Now, the ZL1, of course, is weird because they are keeping it as still a manual-only type of car, where the automatic is actually the rare option. If you go do a search for ZL1 Camaros, and you'll actually find that more of them on dealer lots right now are manuals. There are some that are automatics, but the dealers... I'm going off of Guitarmageddon ZL1's videos here. He said that they would get as many as 3 per year. Whereas the manual, even though it's still pretty rare, it's actually much more common. But that means if you want the automatic, you simply have to wait. And then, of course, that brings me up to the next point where, why are manuals still being sold? Well, for one, they still make money on manual. If they sell a manual and they can make money, they're going to. That's a car company's logic right there. If they can make money on a vehicle, they're going to do it. They're going to sell a certain trim level. They're going to sell a certain transmission, regardless. So obviously that's why things like sports cars always tend to have the manual option, whereas cheaper cars, it's gone away, just simply because everyone who wants a manual these days probably is going to want something sporty or something cheap. And of course, these days with millennials, what I found is when I ask people about manual, a lot of people will tell you, well, they've had one bad experience. This is one common one. I drove manual once, but I just couldn't do it, so I gave up. That's a common one. Another one is simply they've never learned, so been unwilling to learn. It's typical, because simply no one has a manual car anymore, so it's kind of hard to learn to start with. And then on top of that, when you do have these automatics that are faster, and I've had debates with people about that, and of course, that was before I truly accepted it, and it was back in the day. I was in denial that automatics were always faster, but it has gotten to the point where I do accept it now because I do know. But there are people who, A, still know how to drive a manual. There's still millennials that do, and there's still the older generation that still knows how and will permanently drive manual. There's those enthusiasts out there. So there are the people that know that, well, debate, this is opinion, but they do know manuals are better. Just put that out there, believe me or not. So anyway, there are the people that will drive it, and then there's the people, those are the ones that keep manuals alive, because if anything, there's enough of them still to where automakers can make money on it. For example, once again, the Corvette. There's still that quarter of Corvette buyers who say, no, I want manual. I want to shift my own gears. And there's plenty of cars where manuals are an option, but either way, I know that number is going down steadily. But either way, there are several enough that, usually it's the sporty ones that keep it as an option. Because there are people still willing to learn how to drive manual, they're around. But until the day that, they'll be around until the day that car companies no longer are making money. The way I look at it this way is that's why manuals are still even around, but they are a dying breed because of everything I just mentioned. So there are the enthusiasts that keep them around, but until the day a car company will not make money making a manual model, there still will be manual options on a few cars. But when you look at a car, let's take for example the Hellcat, or specifically the Charger Hellcat. It's a car because you know the Challenger Hellcat has a manual option, but the Charger doesn't. The simple reason being that Dodge would never make money. This is an article I read a few years ago when the Hellcat had just come out. And I was talking about why there won't be a Challenger Hellcat, or Charger Hellcat, I should say. Simply put, they said that because the difference between the manual versus automatic cars, the LX platform that Chrysler uses is actually floor pan, it constitutes as a whole different car. So in order to sell it, they'd have to go through a separate crash test. Because of that costs around $40 million, give or take. Now that means for an auto company, well, that's going to cost them that much to do the crash test, meaning they have to have enough profit in selling the car to make back $40 million. And simply put, on the Charger Hellcat, it's so low production that they said by the time they were, by so many people ordering the manuals, they would just never make that money back. So they simply never decided to do it. It was something they just said, we're never going to make money, let's not bother doing it. And eventually that's going to get to the point, it's going to become the case with a lot of cars. There's simply not going to be enough sales to justify making that number of cars. $40 million, if you look at it, if every car had that option, there's some cars that just never would make that kind of money. But that's up for debate. So like I said, you now can get better gas mileage with automatics. Automatics are consistently faster, and automakers just simply aren't making manual cars anymore, to the point where the younger generation of drivers just simply don't know how to drive stick. So it's up for debate, but that's why I personally believe the manual's dying. But I think the manual is going to be around until the day that automakers are not going to make money making a manual car. Now, as some of you know, I am looking at buying a Mustang, possibly a Camaro. And I personally have decided I'm getting the manual version. Now, tell me I'm wrong or tell me I'm right. Some people will argue, but I personally think I'm right. I want to keep the manuals around. I believe we should save the manuals. Anyway, let me know what you all think in the comments below. If you disagree with anything I said, let me know what you think about my video. Let me know your opinion on manuals. Would you rather have a manual or would you rather have an automatic? Anyway, if you like this video, go ahead and leave a thumbs up. If you're stopping in for this channel for the first time, please subscribe. I am trying to grow this channel. And anyway, have a good day.